My name's Andrew Elder. I'm a doctor. I'm not going to tell you what kind of doctor I am until later on though, but I'm starting off this meeting for you because I'm president of this very old college. So welcome to you to the second of 3 sessions, school sessions. And this one's called Physicians' Pathways. Remember, the whole idea of it really is not just to give you background on being a doctor, but hopefully to encourage as many of you as possible to be doctors. The world needs doctors. Okay, so that's our hope. We've got 3 talks for you this afternoon, and we hope there'll be lots of questions here in the room and online using Slido as we have before. We're going to start off by hearing from my friend and colleague, Dr. Rosie Barua. Rosie is a consultant, as you can see on the screen there, both in the Western General and the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh, and her specialty is intensive care medicine. She also does a bit of anaesthetics, but I think Rosie's going to mainly speak to us about intensive care medicine. Rosie.
Hi everyone. My name's Rosie and I'm going to talk for the next 15 to 20 minutes about my pathway to becoming a consultant in intensive care medicine. So apparently you're told not to say this in interviews and on your UCAS form, but I have wanted to be a doctor since I was really young because I just liked the idea of using what skill and knowledge I had in a way that helped people, and that does still remain my primary motivation for doing what I do. But I started my career in terms of applying to medical school at a secondary school which has since been knocked down. This was Thomasmere High School in the northeast of Glasgow in a commuter suburb called Bishopbriggs. And it was a quite interesting school in that it had a really mixed catchment area. So some people from places in Glasgow that were incredibly deprived, and then some people from places in Glasgow that were much less so. So it was an interesting place to go to secondary school and traditionally did not send very many people to university. But from Thomasmere, I ended up going somewhere a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. So this is the archway leading into the medical quad of Edinburgh Medical School. So I trained there for 6 years, including 1 year of an intercalated BSc in neuroscience, because I really like brains, which we're going to talk about in a bit, and have ended up becoming a consultant in intensive care medicine. And the problem with us ICU people is that we're obsessed with COVID, and this is a photograph of me in March 2020 about to enter our COVID bubble, which is what we called the sealed off part of the ICU where we kept our COVID patients. We had a photojournalist from the Guardian newspaper come and join us, and so the photographs I have today of our ICU are his photos. So to talk about my career path in a little bit more detail, in 1994, I started at Edinburgh. It felt like a huge step up because Edinburgh traditionally has a lot of students who come from England as well as from overseas, all of whom had done A-levels, and they all felt far ahead of me as somebody who'd come from a state school. I'd only done higher biology and hadn't done sort of much human biology, and they all seemed to have a huge level of sort of confidence as well as kind of a greater level of knowledge than I felt I had. So it was a journey in terms of realizing that I was there because I was good enough to be there, because it didn't always feel like I fitted in. But after 6 fairly happy years, really, at Edinburgh Medical School, I started what we then called house jobs, which was your first year after graduation from medical school, and that was at the old Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh on Lauriston Place, which is now the Futures Institute of the University of Edinburgh, and it's a beautiful building, so if you ever have an opportunity to go in for a visit, you should do. After that, I did 2 years of medicine at the Western General Hospital, and that was a medical rotation. So that was 2 years with 3 jobs in each year in general medicine, haematology, rheumatology, care of the elderly, and also 4 months of intensive care. And I'd initially walked onto the intensive care unit at the Western General when I was doing my BSc in neuroscience, because one of the modules that we did was called clinical neuroscience. And I remember walking onto the ICU and thinking it was just the most incredible environment I'd ever seen. All these patients on ventilators with sort of pressure bolts drilled into their skulls, and just thinking this is this temple of glittering clinical delights, and what an incredible experience it must be to work there. So with that in mind, after doing 2 years of medicine, at that point you could not train solely in intensive care. So you could only train with something else, and that something else for me was anaesthetics. So I did 2.5 years of anaesthetic training. And then just as I started my specialty training, which is my registrar training, I had my daughter. So I was off for a year on maternity leave. So the majority of my anaesthetic and intensive care medicine training was done what we call in medicine less than full-time. So initially it's 60% of whole-time equivalent, and then sort of 80% at whole-time equivalent until my daughter went to school. And then for my final year of training, I trained full-time. When I started training, full-time was 72 hours a week, although in reality we worked closer to 90 to 100. When I was a senior house officer, that dropped to 56 hours a week, and in my latter years of training, it dropped to 48, which is what the current working week for doctors in training still is. So a feature of my experience of training was lots of exams. And when I say and the rest, lots of sort of audits and quality improvement projects and sort of writing papers, and you have to do a lot of other stuff as well as just doing the job. And in order to progress through specialty training, there are a number of examinations that you need to do. So I did my intercalated year in neuroscience, obviously finals to get through medical school, but then a bunch of what we call professional examinations, which are set by royal colleges that you need to do to progress into specialty training. So 2003, I did the membership exams of the Royal College of Physicians, and I'm still a member, or actually a fellow of this College of Physicians. The fellowship examination of the Royal College of Anaesthetists, which I finished in 2009, and in 2012, the European Diploma in Intensive Care Medicine. And, by the time I finished doing exams, I was 35 years old, and I started doing exams at the age of 15, as you all have done. But by the time I finished, my hair was going grey, and I had a child in school, and it can be a lot trying to work lots of nights, lots of weekends, as well as study in your spare time for exams. But it is, the hurdles that you need to go through in order to complete specialty training. And then in 2012, I took up my place as a consultant in intensive care medicine. And so talking a wee bit more about what is intensive care medicine, and I don't know if any of you kind of have a concept of what an ICU is like, or what people who work in ICUs do, but you maybe think it's quite high tech. It's sort of ventilators and lots of machines and unconscious people, and it is all of those things, but I like to think of it as being GP for really sick people. And that might seem like quite an antithetical thing to say, in the sense that general practice is very much in the community, and it's people who are not comatose on ventilators. But as I go through talking about what intensive care is, it'll maybe make a little bit more sense why I describe it in that way. So the reasons why I do ICU and why I absolutely love it is that we deal with such a broad range of patients. So pediatric intensive care medicine is its own specialty, but from the age of about 14, you would be considered able to be treated in an adult ICU. And we have patients sometimes going all the way into their 90s, so really a huge age range. Unlike, for example, cardiologists or gastroenterologists, we deal with every organ system. So if somebody's lungs are failing, we will treat them with various things up to and including invasive mechanical ventilation, where people are sedated, a tube goes in their throat and they're put in a ventilator. If their hearts are failing, we can use medications and devices to help that. If their kidneys are failing, we can place them on dialysis, and we do that as intensive care medicine specialists. So it's a huge variety of skills that we use every working day, and that really is a big variety in the sense that When a really sick patient comes into the ICU, you can be doing a lot of really practical things, sort of putting them off to sleep, putting lines in their jugular vein, into their arteries. You could be doing diagnostic tests at the bedside, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But then, and while you're doing that, using very sort of direct communication with your colleagues, and everything's very time critical. And then you go and speak to the family, and there's this very clear tonal shift where you're using a completely different set of communication skills to communicate to their family. And then about 1 in 5 of our patients does not survive their stay in intensive care, and I genuinely think one of the best things that we do is providing people with a good death when that is the appropriate thing for them, and providing high quality care at the end of life, which again is very different to resuscitation of the critically ill, but it's absolutely a core part of our skill set. We work as teams, both with our nursing staff, with visiting specialists, with physios, speech and language therapists, dietitians. It really is an absolute team sport. And you learn new things every day. Like all the time, we see patients with diseases that I've never seen before, or new treatments that I've not been involved in before, and you're always learning. So over the course of a 20, 30-year career, you're learning every day, and that just keeps you so interested and so engaged in what you're doing. It really is just intellectually fascinating. So in terms of a regular day, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but there's no such thing as a regular day. But in terms of the conduct of the day, at about 8:30, the night team hand over to the day team. We go around and review all of our patients. About 11 o'clock, we do a ward round where we go and see all our patients one by one and talk through how they're doing, make a plan for that day, communicate that to the nursing staff. After the ward round, we'll do jobs. And in the top corner there, that's one of my colleagues, Alistair Hay, putting a dialysis line in the neck of a COVID patient who has kidney failure and needs to be dialysed. The bottom images are an ultrasound image that I took of a young patient with lymphoma who had a lot of fluid around their lung, which was keeping their oxygen levels very, very low. So to improve that, I put in a chest drain to drain some of that fluid out, and those 2 little pots are some of the stuff that came out of their chest. So, practical procedures to try and help people get better. And then at 8:30 at night, the day team hands over to the night team. But we can be getting referrals, which are calls from the wards and the emergency department about sick patients who may need to come to intensive care 24 hours a day, predominantly though, in the evening and overnight. So as a consultant, I work sort of 24 hours. I get to go home when it's quiet and hopefully have a sleep, but we're on all day and all night because that's the specialty of ICM. It really does sort of cover all hours of the day. Within ICM, there's opportunities to have other interests. So for example, my subspecialty interest is neurocritical care, so care of the brain injured patient, and that can be brain injuries from trauma. So for example, a road traffic accidents, it can be from brain hemorrhages, it can be from brain infections, and this was me as a registrar using a hand drill to drill a hole through somebody's skull to place a very thin plastic probe into their brain to measure the pressure within their brain. And I look very excited in one of the pictures because I hadn't done this before, but by the end it took about 20 minutes because the skull is very, very thick. So it's not something I do on a regular basis unless you have a pneumatic drill. It takes ages. But neurocritical care is quite a demanding specialty in the sense that a lot of patients are very young, many of them do not survive, and the ones that do can be left very profoundly disabled, which involves a lot of conversation with families about expectations and what that patient may want in terms of what would be an acceptable rate of disability. Other clinical interests, point-of-care ultrasound involves using ultrasound machines which use sound waves to literally look inside a patient's body to try and diagnose what's wrong with them. And that is something we use in addition to physical examination to try and work out what's wrong with somebody. And this is an ultrasound I took of an unfortunate gentleman with severe pneumonia, secondary to a strep pneumoniae infection. And he was very, very unwell and unfortunately did not survive his stay in ICU. But that's his lung that you can see sort of just at the top of the image there, and it's completely solid. That your lung should not look like that. I don't know if any of you have seen sort of pictures of lungs on YouTube or whatever. They're incredibly sort of delicate organisms, and this lung looks exactly the same in texture as the liver, which is underneath it, and it should not look like that. But point-of-care ultrasound is another of my clinical interests. Contributing to the greater sort of work of the specialty. So I have a master's in medical ethics and law and have had the opportunity to contribute to the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine's guidance on care at the end of life, which was a very satisfying document to work on. To contribute a chapter on social media in intensive care to this textbook, Law and Ethics in Intensive Care, and that's a little article that I wrote with one of our trainee colleagues on Scots law and its relevance to intensive care medicine. So these are all kind of very satisfying things that you can do that are not clinical, but very much relevant to the practice of intensive care medicine. In terms of research interests, intensive care medicine has only 20% female consultants, which is completely different to the sort of 60% female medical students that we see going into UK medical schools. So there's a huge drop-off, and we're very much a minority. And investigating that is the topic of my PhD, which I'm currently doing using qualitative research methods. And these are some of the things that I've written about gender in medicine. And that bottom study is a qualitative study I did with one of our medical students on the experience of working throughout the COVID pandemic. So again, having a research element to the work that I get to do. And the great thing about being a consultant is that you get to kind of indulge your special interests in a way, and people kind of listen to you, which is nice. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is, my daughter, for instance, has never had to worry about period products being available at school because they have been available in schools and colleges for years, but they have not been available to people in hospital, patients and staff. So a campaign with the BMA, which I started up trying to get period products in hospitals, which is something that I just really care about. And also I'm autistic, and I think there's amongst medical professionals generally quite a poor understanding of autism, both in terms of how it presents in other medical professionals, because it is likely that autism is overrepresented in doctors because of the qualities you need to be a doctor. And so I'm the ICU specialty lead for Autistic Doctors International, which is a specialty group that advocates and supports other autistic doctors. And again, I got to sort of write an article all about autism in ICU, both from a patient and a staff perspective. And it's incredibly satisfying when there's stuff that you're really interested and passionate about, that you have the opportunity to feel that you're making some kind of difference. So you're making a difference both clinically and non-clinically. So it is an incredibly satisfying way to sort of spend your efforts. But to finish off, why do intensive care medicine? I mean, it's not easy, but I think you'll hear from our other speakers today that no specialty is, but it is incredibly satisfying. There's so much variety. It's really challenging, but we work in teams that support each other, and we genuinely have fun, even though sometimes what we're dealing with can be incredibly emotionally demanding, which sounds a little bit contrary, but it's what gets us through the day and keeps us coming back and enjoying what we do. And I always have one typo in every slide, and I only ever notice it when I'm actually giving the talk, so it should say out of hours working. But because a lot of our work is out of hours, so by out of hours I mean evenings and weekends. For example, tomorrow I start work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and don't finish until Wednesday morning. But because of that, I have a lot of days off during the week, which again gives me a lot of flexibility, and I don't have to do school runs anymore, but when I did, it meant that I could be around during the day a lot. And in terms of outside of work, these are my dogs, Poppy and Petal, and my daughter, Isla. And you wouldn't think that these three things would take up a lot of time, but they really do. And this is Isla 6 weeks ago when she got her SQA results in, which was, I think, is it 6th of August? That's seared into some of your mind. And I was doing a week of ICU, and I didn't know if she would need help, like phoning UCAS or getting into clearing or whatever. So she came to ICU to get her results, but she, as you can see from her face, she got the results she needed, and that's her high-fiving the resus mannequin. So happy days all round. But the future of ICM, we have an aging population. When I was your age, 60 was considered old. It is no longer considered old. So we are having to provide ICU to an increasingly frail population. We do not have enough ICU beds. We do not have enough ICU nurses. We do not have enough ICU doctors. And yet we are going to be stretched potentially with pandemics in the future. We have a lot of patients with infections. Antimicrobial resistance is becoming an increasing challenge internationally and will become a greater challenge in the UK in the very near future. We need to provide resilience in the provision of our ICU by ensuring people who need critical care can get it in a timely fashion. But to do that, we also need to preserve the resilience within the ICU workforce, because intensive care is not just a physical place, it is care that is provided by people. And this is Kirsty and Lou, two of our ICU nurses, again in March 2020. And if we do not look after our team, then we will not be able to provide critical care. So these are all of the challenges that we're going to need to try and get our heads around as time goes on. But that is a very whistle-stop tour through what brought me to intensive care medicine and what I do in my day as an intensive care doctor. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
So, Rosie, thanks very much. We're going to take all the questions at the end. Some of them are coming in on Slido, but keep them coming in. Remember, the hashtag there is RCPE Schools with a capital S 2. I'm going to talk a bit about me now. What can I tell you about me? Well, I'm quite an old doctor. Rosie didn't say that 22 years ago, when she was a trainee in the Western General, I was one of the consultants. So that gives you an idea of how old I am. I'm a consultant in geriatric medicine called Elder, and I'll come back to that later on. I'm an honorary professor at the university here in Edinburgh, and I'm president of this college. And I won't go into any detail of what the college does, but basically it supports medical education, and it also is a political organisation. So I have to speak to politicians across the country about the state of healthcare and what we want to see change. I'm not from a medical family, and in the picture on the left there, I'm the one on the left. I grew up in Portobello, Mountcastle in fact, and in those days, none of you will remember it, the skyline there was dominated by Portobello Power Station. Some of your teachers might remember it. So I went to a state school down there. Why did I want to become a doctor? Well, it's actually interesting. I think all doctors, when they think about that, it's quite a difficult thing to answer. There's no doubt my school encouraged me when they saw that I could pass exams. They said, this is a good thing for you to do. But I guess my main influences were my parents there. My mum was a nurse. She'd left school when she was 15. My dad wrote for the Evening News. He'd left school when he was 15. But they both thought it was a great thing to do to look after people and to be a doctor. So they put that in my head. In fact, my sister, my only sibling, she became a nurse. The book I show you there my dad was very fond of this book. It's quite an old book now, written by A.J. Cronin, who was Scottish, called The Citadel. And it's really about how healthcare was before the National Health Service. Okay, and I remember reading that and thinking, gosh, the National Health Service is a fantastic thing. And I think that was part of my motivation too. But believe it or not, the other thing that motivated me were the stories of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, the detective, was actually, remember the character was created by a guy called Arthur Conan Doyle. He was a medical student in Edinburgh, and he based the detective on one of his teachers, a doctor, who was fantastic at noticing things, right? The doctor observed little things that other people didn't see and then worked out how to solve a crime in this case. So I was intrigued by this whole idea of observing things and working out what's wrong, and I'll come back to that because it's relevant to diagnosis. So I went to, there I am, age 17, 1976. I started medical school. I went straight from 5th year. I didn't do 6th year studies. And lots of people do that. I think it's okay, right? The first year at medical school was okay, and it got me grounded in it. I did a 6-year course, and then I graduated when I was 23 in a class that in those days was about 2/3 male, 1/3 female. Now it's slightly more females than males. But I wanted just to say to you that don't worry if and when you get into medical school if you don't know what you want to be, yeah, in terms of a specialist. The main thing is just thinking, well, could I imagine myself being a doctor? Because most people, as they go through medical school, they're not sure what they're going to be, okay? So don't worry if you're not clear what you want to be. How do you work out what kind of doctor you will be? Well, the way I think it works for lots of people, it's you think of things as you go through medical school that you see that you wouldn't actually like to do, or you couldn't imagine yourself doing. So I couldn't imagine myself spending most of my day operating on somebody rather than speaking to them. So pretty early on I thought, I'm not going to be a surgeon. I didn't want to work away from people, patients, so I didn't really want to work in an x-ray department or laboratory. I felt I probably wouldn't work with children, and I didn't as well want to be too specialised in one part of the body, and many medical specialties are based on a part of the body, the heart, the lungs, the guts, the brain, etc. And I thought what I'd like to do is, I thought I'd prefer to work in a hospital, so that made me think, well, I don't want to be a GP and work in the community, and that's an important divide. Yeah, do you want to be part of a big hospital or part of a smaller practice? I felt I definitely wanted to work in teams. I wanted to be doing something when I was speaking to people, and I wanted to be, as what we would call in medicine, as general as I could, not limited to heart disease or lung disease, a bit like what Rosie was saying in intensive care. My name did come into it, not for me, but lots of other people said, as soon as I said I was going to be a geriatrician, well, you're called Andrew Elder. You know, you're bound to be. And in fact, there's this well-known phenomenon called nominative determinism. There's a whole lot of articles have been written about it. And look at these other people, Professor Nutt, the psychiatrist, Judge, who's a judge, Lord Brain, who's a neurologist. And my favourite is the history teacher called Norman Conquest. I don't honestly think my name had anything to do with it, but as I say, other people sometimes laugh and say, well, that's why you chose. Why else did I become a geriatrician? Well, I sometimes explain it to people this way. Edinburgh's 2 football team are Hearts and Hibs, yeah. When I was early on in my career, I did a research project on heart disease in older people. And it got me quite interested in the heart, and I thought maybe I could be a cardiologist. But I actually got more interested in older people because of that and all the problems that they have. How do Hibs fit in? Well, Hibs, all of you know from Edinburgh, are the underdogs, aren't they? The wee team, they're called in Edinburgh. And I'm a Hibs fan, so I'm biased, but I'm a supporter of the underdog, the underprivileged. And older people have been very underprivileged in the National Health Service. So I thought I want to do something to support older people. And it's important too to remember the shape of our population, because Scotland and the whole world, in fact, populations all around the world are aging. This is a population graph from 1901, so 120 years ago. And we've got females and males in the 2 different colours, and that's the total number of people of each sex. And then up this y-axis is their age. So 100 years ago, there were lots and lots and lots of children. Believe it or not, about 1/3 of children born in Edinburgh in the 1920s died before they were 18. 1/3. So there was lots and lots of children and very few older people, proportionately. Here's what it looks like now, and that line there is just to remind us how it looked. But there's proportionately many fewer younger children and many, many more older people. And one of the first things about a health service is it should match the needs of the population, of the people. So if there's more older people, we need more specialists in care of older people. And in fact, now already in the UK, geriatric medicine is the biggest specialty, okay? So there's lots of jobs in it. As I said as well, I like medicine for older people because it's what I would call general medicine. There's this word here, multi-morbidity at the bottom. And all that means is if you've got more than one thing wrong with you, okay? Younger people, when they come to hospital, often have a single thing wrong with them. Older people will typically have more than one. And there are some of the common conditions there: COPDs, lung disease, heart failure, dementia, over here problems with vision and hearing, and infectious disease. So a lot of medicine for older people is about how you look after people with lots of different things wrong with them. And hospitals don't like or haven't liked people with lots of things wrong with them, because the way we've set up hospitals is to kind of pigeonhole people, yeah? If you've got problems, orthopedic problems, you go to an orthopedic ward. If you've got GI, so that's gastrointestinal problems, you go to a GI unit. Whereas the person with multimorbidity doesn't fit in so well, okay? So again, emphasising there the need for change in our health service as a geriatrician, and also the need for multiple skills across all these diseases. Other features of multimorbidity are that people come in and out of hospital a lot. Those of you who have older relatives will know that, so you get to bridge or work between the community and hospital. The more illnesses they have, the more drugs you'll be on. So geriatricians have lots of fun trying to stop drugs. You tend to think of doctors as always starting drugs, but there's a big job to be done in stopping drugs that people are taking. One thing that comes with multimorbidity and age is what called dependency. So you might need a stick to walk or a frame to walk. You might need help to get out of bed. So rehabilitation comes into it, and just care for people in that position comes into it. And there's also cognitive dependency. So the two problems of dementia, which is irreversible, and delirium, which is confusion, which can come and go. So healthcare for older people, for me, is a team job, yeah, including patients' families, that treats people in all these kinds of boxes: sudden illness, long-standing illness, trying to prevent what we can in terms of diseases and dependence, caring for those when you can't reverse disease or dependence, and also caring for the dying. That's all I was going to say about geriatric medicine, but I also wanted just to say a wee bit about some, I guess, principles for me at the end of my career that relate to whatever kind of doctor you become. So I'll just run through very quickly several of them. The first is this phrase. Nobody quite knows who said it, but it's very, very true in medicine, okay? We don't cure that many people. Yeah, we should always try and cure, but we relieve people suffering a lot, and we always try and comfort people at their time of need. So that's a phrase worth remembering. The second thing I'd stress to you is, and this is a quote by a very famous doctor from over 100 years ago called Osler, and he said, "The good physician treats the disease, the great physician treats the person who has the disease." Yeah? So if you become a heart doctor, you're focusing on diseases of the heart, but you're looking after people who happen to have that disease. And everybody's different. Yeah? So one person with a heart attack may be very, very different from the next person you meet with a heart attack. So focus on the person. One of the most important things I learned, and I try and teach to doctors, is to be able to listen to people and to hear their story, because most of our diagnoses still these days can be made just by listening to people. And that's a real skill to develop, whatever type of doctor you are. The next thing you should cultivate are your powers of observation, okay? Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence being very good at recognizing patterns, but humans are fantastic at it. I'm sure you can all glance at the top row here and say muffin, chihuahua, chihuahua, muffin, chihuahua, muffin, and go through it that fast, yeah? Artificial intelligence struggles with that. So use your powers of observation, yeah? Like Sherlock Holmes. And just to give you one example of that in real life medicine, this young man here, I asked him to stick his tongue out as far as he could, yeah? Now when you've been trained in observation, you'll see three things there that are abnormal. One is he can't stick his tongue out very far at all. If you look later at a friend and ask them to stick their tongue out, you'll see how far out their tongue should come. The second is if you look closely at the tongue there, there's little waves, see there, of abnormal movement, what we call involuntary movement. And the third thing is that there's saliva, spit, gathering in his mouth. Yeah? And that shouldn't happen. He should be able to swallow it. So by asking him a few questions and noticing these three things, which tell you that the muscles of the tongue and swallowing aren't working properly, and they tell you a wee bit more than that too, we can make a diagnosis. And it's a diagnosis, it's called motor neuron disease. No X-ray or MRI scan can make that diagnosis. No blood test can. So just with your speaking to the patient and observing, you can do that. I'd encourage you always throughout your careers to be curious, never stop asking how and why. And the story I often tell about this is this one of Sir Alexander Fleming when he discovered penicillin. He worked in a laboratory in London. When he went away on holiday, he left out some of the culture dishes that he was experimenting on. When he came back from his holiday 2 weeks later, he noticed this, that the bugs were growing in the dish quite evenly, apart from this area which was next to a fungus, a mold that had grown there. And he said to himself, how can that be? Why is that? And the reason it was that the mold was producing a form of penicillin. And that led to the discovery of really the first, still one of the most potent antibiotics we have. So ask how and why. All through your careers, remember simple things too, like the power of touch. I like this painting to relate that simply because the only eyes we see here are those of the patient, a young girl probably with tuberculosis. But look at the hands. She's touching her mum's touching her, the nurse is touching her sister. We don't talk about much in medicine, but all the doctors here know that the power of just touching people is phenomenally important in what we do. Coming towards the end of what I want to say, do remember our impact on other people. Yeah, and this is a big part of being a doctor. Maya Angelou is an American poet and writer. She wasn't a doctor, but my goodness, she got this right, what she said there. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel, right? So I'll see families, maybe of a patient who died, I'll see the family a year or two afterwards, and they'll come up to me and say, Professor Elder, thank you so much for the way you looked after my mum, even though the person's maybe died, because they remember that they were well looked after by a team of people. And my last slide is this one, just to make that point about the importance of us as doctors, as people. This is quite a famous medical image here. It's called The Doctor in Our Times. And it was painted by this guy at the bottom, Luke Fildes, and you can see it in Tate Britain, in fact, in London. And I think lots of people are familiar with the image, but they don't know the whole story. It shows a doctor here, and most doctors then were male, so we can forgive the artist that. And here's the patient, it's a child on two chairs there. And in fact, that's the child's deathbed, yeah? The child dies. What lots of people don't know, in the background here is you've got the father and the mother slumped over the table in anticipation of the grief to come. See, what people don't know, I think, is that the artist is the father. Luke Fildes and his wife had a wee 2-year-old son who died of diphtheria in their house, like this, with the doctor there. And Luke Fildes had been asked, as I say, to paint a picture to represent what being a doctor meant, okay? And he said that for him and his wife, the doctor's character and bearing had a huge influence on them. Even though he knew he couldn't save their child, he stayed with them Yeah, and he looked after them in that way right through it all. And as you go through medical school and training, and you'll see lots and lots of fabulous technology, yeah? But you've got to remember that these simple things that I've spoken about here, including just being you and being present, are very, very important for patient care. So I'm not sure what specialty you will choose. You'll find lots of fulfillment in geriatrics, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about it in a wee while. But we're going to go on now to our third talk, which is from Professor Sarah Brown. And Sarah holds the Grant Chair of Dermatology at the University of Edinburgh. And when there's a name before the word chair, that means that you become a professor, it's a very special chair. So, Sarah, we welcome you, interested to hear your talk.
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to speak. It's a real privilege to come and talk to people that might want to be doctors. So, and great to be able to tell my story that I hope you might find interesting. So, as you've just heard, I'm a dermatologist, and I thought I'd talk to you about why I chose dermatology as a medical specialty. So, if you look at your skin, it is really fascinating, and everybody in this room is different. We all have different fingerprints. We all have different markings on our skin that tell a lot about us. And obviously skin colour is something that is really fundamentally important to us as human beings, caused a lot of problems in the world, but also a lot of opportunities to understand people. The reason I love skin is because it's not just something on the outside, it also provides a window to what's going on inside. And the two previous speakers have both explained why they love caring for different aspects of human beings, and skin really gives you a window to see inside, to understand those things. And skin really matters. You know, when your skin's working very well, it's something you can totally take for granted. But I guess anybody here who's had a skin condition, you know that it really matters. It makes a big difference to how you feel. And people have done studies to show that. So if you use this metric called years of healthy life lost to disability, obviously you can become disabled for many different reasons, but skin disease is a big part of that. And if you have a skin disease, it can contribute to many, many years of healthy life lost throughout the world. And this is another way of showing that. So here, the different sizes of the squares in this big square are the different things that can go wrong in terms of causing disability. And you see skin is there, a relatively big chunk. And of skin, dermatitis, so that means inflammation of the skin, that's what I specialise in. That is a big chunk within the big chunk. So skin really matters. If you learn one thing today, don't forget that. So what does your skin do? We all have skin, as I've said. It's something you can take for granted. I'm going to ask for some participation here. What do you think your skin does? I ask this of primary school children, and they can always tell me. So see what you guys say. Just shout it out. What do you think your skin does? There's lots of things, so it doesn't matter if you don't get the number one thing. It protects you from infection, very important. So it's outside your body, isn't it, protecting you from infection? But it's super clever. It doesn't just protect you from infection, it also allows millions and millions of microbes to live on it. So it's not just about repelling all infection like we might have in the intensive care unit. It's about allowing microbes to live there healthily. They make us more healthy, but we don't want to allow infection to get in or invade inside the body. Yep, that's a good start. What else does your skin do? I've got a few clues here. What about this clue? Is it like a bag? No. What does your skin do? This is the one that the primary school children always get first. They say it keeps your blood and bones inside. And I think that's, you know, when you're at primary school and you fall over and you start bleeding because you've hurt your skin. So it's kind of like a bag. It just keeps everything else inside, all these other organs that are important. It keeps your blood and bones and brain and tissue fluid and lungs. It keeps them all inside. keeps your blood inside as well, but that's not just blood, that's also water. So what's your skin got to do with water? Who wants to tell me that? Has anybody been in the bath and your fingers go all like squidgy? The fingertips go all wiggly. Have you seen that? Maybe you all have showers nowadays. It's a bit of an old person thing to do, to have a bath. I like having a bath. And if you stay in the bath or if you stay in the shower for ages, your fingerprints go all wiggly. Have you seen that? Like a sponge, yeah? Somebody's nodding, thankfully. So the reason that happens is because some water is soaking into your skin, and the water soaks into the outermost part of the skin, but it doesn't go right through your skin. So it kind of makes the outermost all soggy. So the outermost layer of your skin swells up because it's so soggy, and it goes all wiggly because it's fixed to the bottom layer, and the bottom layer doesn't get soggy and swell up. So that's why you get that wiggly pattern. The outermost is going all wiggly and the inner layer is staying flat. So skin keeps water outside your body. If it didn't, we'd all end up like a sponge, a soggy sponge, if we went in the shower or the bath. But we don't. Skin doesn't allow too much water to go in. But you probably know who sweats here. I guess not everybody does. There are some people that have genetic conditions and they can't sweat. And you might think that would be very useful. But actually we need to sweat to let water outside our body and to let ourselves cool down. So your skin is really clever. It keeps water out, but it also lets water escape in the right amount. Okay, I'm going to go through these more quickly. What about a teddy bear? Skin is really important in making you feel things. So again, you might think it'd be super helpful if you didn't feel any pain. I think we could all appreciate if it doesn't hurt when you stub your toe. But actually, if it didn't hurt when you stubbed your toe, some patients have that problem. It doesn't hurt when they stub their toe. Then they carry on stubbing their toe until they have no toe. You can literally destroy your fingers and toes if you don't have pain. So feeling pain is important. Feeling a cuddle is important. It's not just for grown-ups. Like, babies really need to feel a cuddle. And if children grow up without being cuddled, they don't feel that affection, they don't feel the warmth of human contact, then they don't develop in the right way. They don't experience life in the right way. They don't develop those connections. So feeling nice is super important. Temperature. Skin detects the temperature that's outside your body, and it tells your brain whether you need to sweat, whether you need to shiver. Skin is important for making a vitamin. Anybody know which vitamin your skin makes with the sunshine? Say again? Vitamin D. Vitamin D. Skin makes vitamin D, so you don't need to take vitamin D as a tablet. Your skin can make it with the help of sunshine. And then you probably learn in school it's important to protect your skin against getting too much sunshine. That is absolutely true, but it's also really important to get enough sunshine on your skin. But what we sometimes forget is skin is what protects the inside of our body from getting too much sunshine. Sunshine is ultraviolet light, and ultraviolet light at the extremes of the spectrum cause DNA damage. And people that have very thin skin, so babies, for example, can be very easily damaged by ultraviolet light because it passes straight through very thin skin and damages the cells inside. It damages the DNA, it causes cancer. So skin, sure, you need to protect your skin from the sun, but don't forget that your skin is also protecting you from sun. And skin is different in different people. It makes us what we are. It makes us look like we are. We might spend time making our skin look more beautiful or whatever. Making ourselves look different from other people is very important. And your skin is absolutely essential in that. Because skin speaks about who you are. Whether you want to give away how you're feeling or not, your skin can speak for you. If you're blushing, if you're sweating, if you're frightened, you go white. Your skin gives away loads of things. It talks even if you don't want to. So these are just a few things that your skin does. There's lots more that I won't list absolutely everything. So Professor Elder's already talked to us about one reason that he wanted to be a doctor is because he liked detective work in Sherlock Holmes. And skin really makes you into the ultimate detective. So when you see a birthmark like this, if you understand skin, you know immediately that those different parts of the skin that are a different colour because the cells are different in that region. So I know that within that area of skin, there are different cells, different pigment. And this is another bit of detective work. When you see a rash that's going in a line like that up the body, that tells me that that rash has occurred quite early in the baby being formed. And that's because when you're formed in the womb, you start as a clump of eggs, and then you grow into a little tadpole type thing, and then your arms and legs bud out like this. And what forms the skin around the arms and legs as they bud out is a part of the embryo that kind of wraps around. And as that tissue is wrapping around, that's what makes the opportunity to get a stripe down there. It's like the stitch on my dress. You can imagine the fabric is wrapped around and it makes a line going up here. Just the same in this embryo, the skin wrapped around and made a line going up. And that's why you can get a change in one cell here, then you get the change going up here and getting that rash. So it's telling you that rash occurred early in that baby in the womb. This is an interesting rash. You see the abnormal bit here is bright red. Hope you'd all noticed that. If that was your leg, you might be worried. And why would it be? Why would you get a rash like that with a circle of normal skin in the middle? Any good detectives in the audience that want to tell me? Have a guess. What could it be? It's a knee, by the way. Somebody's knee, and it's got a really nasty rash except for a circle in the middle. What would that be? Whisper, whisper, whisper. They were wearing a support like this, that if you look at it very closely, it has a circle on it that was made of different material. So that is a contact allergy, meaning something's coming in contact with the skin that they're allergic to everywhere except for that circle. And you see a very clear line at the top and the bottom because that wasn't in contact with that area. So if you're a detective and you see a rash like that, you know straight away it wasn't something that happened in the womb. It's got a very clear cut-off. It must have been something that's come into contact with the skin from the outside. Now, this is a rash that doesn't come from the outside so much as coming from the inside. This is a rash that I'm very interested in. It's called atopic eczema or atopic dermatitis. And this really is what got me most fascinated in skin. Eczema is a very, very common skin condition. I guess some of you, at least in the audience, will have had it. And eczema is something that is partly genetic. You inherit it from your parents. And one of the things that really got me hooked on skin research is that it's very, very good for doing genetic research. So genetic research, you know about DNA. DNA is what makes you like you are. And DNA is also what can predispose you to getting different diseases. And if you want to understand the genetic basis of disease, then you need to get hold of the building blocks to try and get hold of the DNA to try and figure out how the DNA works. And skin is really a fantastic opportunity for doing the best genetic research. And the reason for that is we can get skin samples relatively easily. We can separate the cells that make up the skin. We grow the outer layer of skin, the keratinocytes, separate from the fibroblasts, the inner layer of skin. We culture them like this. So this is an incubator, and the picture there on the top left is a flask with that pink liquid with cells growing inside it. And we separate the cells from living skin to grow our own artificial skin. It's called a skin organoid. And you say, well, why do we do this? Why do we go from normal skin? Why do we bother making an organoid? Well, the reason we do it is because we can produce artificial skin that is a very similar structure to real skin, and we can ask super complicated questions. We can switch off specific genes, we can switch on specific genes, and we can really get to the bottom of how your DNA is causing changes in the skin. So, coming back to why I decided to be a doctor, well, I didn't have doctors in my family. I actually was born in Africa. My parents were both teachers. They had a lot of respect for doctors, but nobody had been a doctor in the family before. And I was one of those kids that asks why. Again, Professor Elder, we hadn't worked together on this talk, but he said it's important to keep asking why. I started asking why at about that age, really quite annoying. Why? My mum says I used to drive her crazy. So if you're one of those people that likes asking why, I tell you, medicine is fantastic. So from Uganda, we moved to Yorkshire, which was a challenging move, as you can imagine, from the weather, but also the people that we interacted with. It was very different. I was very, very shy as a child. I went to this school that was a state school, but it was a very good school. I was very lucky. And the teachers they believed in me and they managed to encourage me. And I'm sure some of you here have got teachers like that. They helped me come out of my shell to a certain extent, became slightly less shy, and they encouraged me to consider going to medical school. So I came to Edinburgh. I was lucky to get a place at the university here, and that's the same picture that Rosie, our first speaker, spoke about. You go in through those doors, and it's a beautiful archway. And then after training at a medical school in Edinburgh, I moved to Newcastle, and that's where I started to specialise in dermatology, and that's where I got super interested in this skin condition, eczema. I also had 2 children, and they do allow me to show this photo of them. I think they look cute. They think they look terrible, but anyway, this is my 2 kids, Amy and Lawrence. And after training in dermatology, that takes 4 years, but for me it took 9 years, because I worked very much part-time when I had kids and had quite a bit of time off, because my kids I hadn't really appreciated how much I would enjoy being a mum. I thought being a doctor was fantastic, and then I had kids and I thought that was fantastic. So I took quite a bit of time out, which you are allowed to do, working just like 1 day a week, a half day a week, and then I came back a bit more part-time, gradually built up. So when my kids were a bit older, we then went together as a family, my kids and my husband and myself. We moved to Ireland to work in a place where it was an amazing children's hospital. They had really rare skin conditions that I could learn even more. Took my kids with me and my husband. We had fantastic holidays around Ireland. And from there, we then moved to Scotland. So you can tell as a doctor, we did need to move around a lot. And it was a big decision every time to uproot my kids. So whereas I'd spent, my early life in Africa, and then I grew up entirely in Yorkshire, never moved anywhere, remained very shy. My children tell me they're Scottish, they're Irish, they're British. They're very good at speaking to anybody. They're not at all shy. And that is partly because we moved around a bit. So Dundee, I came as a consultant dermatologist, and I moved up to become a professor of molecular and genetic dermatology. And from there, I then moved to Edinburgh 4 years ago now. So it took quite a long time. I graduated in 1996, and by 2020, I was a professor in Edinburgh. That's quite a lot of years, but had a lot of fun in the meantime, moved around, enjoyed all of those years. I can honestly say there were many very challenging times, but overall, it was rewarding and exciting. So I have this title, Professor of Dermatology or Chair of Dermatology. It's not a chair like this. It's a chair, which is another way of saying you're a professor. So what does it mean to me to be a professor? It means I spend, at the moment, about 1 day a week being a doctor, caring for people with skin conditions. And then the other 4 days a week I work in the university, and I'm in charge of a molecular genetics lab, trying to understand how DNA causes skin conditions, especially focusing on atopic eczema. And the reason I do both, it's quite difficult doing 2 jobs, but it's also really exciting to do 2 jobs because you can bring questions from the clinic to the lab, and then the research that we do in the lab directly informs how we can improve looking after patients in the clinic. So who in this audience has got eczema? I'm going to ask you to put your hands up if you have. If you don't want to, it's fine. We've got at least one. I used to have eczema when I was a kid. So you know eczema matters. About 1 in 4 children in the UK get atopic eczema or atopic dermatitis. It's the same thing. And of those, about 1 in 10 grow up to be an adult with eczema or dermatitis. And if you have eczema or dermatitis, it's an itchy, inflammatory skin condition, But it's not just a skin condition. It has what we call comorbidities. So again, as Professor Elder was telling us, many people don't just have one disease. They have other diseases that go with it. So the other diseases that go with eczema are asthma, hay fever, and food allergy. About a third of my patients would have those other allergic conditions. But increasingly, we've recognised that eczema can also go along with neurodevelopmental disorders, including ADHD, and psychiatric disorders, including depression. So it's not just a skin disease. And the reason we can find is because made based on your DNA. Your DNA codes for this really complicated barrier that we've spoken about. It keeps water outside the body, but it allows water to escape. It works in both directions. It allows bacteria to live on the skin, but not to invade through into your body. And it controls the amount of sunshine that enters your body. So when it works well, it's incredible. But when it goes wrong, that's what causes eczema and allergies. When your skin becomes leaky, that barrier is not working, that makes you more prone to getting inflammation in the skin and allergies. And that's what we can model in our artificial skin. We can make examples of abnormal barrier function within the skin. And we show it by using a fluorescent dye. So the blue dots here are the cell nuclei. The central driving part of every cell is a nucleus, and that's a blue dot. And the white on the surface is the fluorescent dye. So if we make a really healthy skin organoid, the fluorescent dye is all trapped on the outside. But if we make a skin organoid that has something like eczema, you can see the dye is leaked through. And we can use that to measure on a molecular level how the DNA makes the skin leaky, how the DNA changes other genes, other proteins, what goes up, what goes down when you switch a single gene. And it makes a very complex map, but it allows us to search for new treatments. And that's really what drives my research. Again, if you've got eczema, we can treat it pretty well, but most of our treatments still focus on the inflammation, the redness, the itching. Our treatments don't focus on the root cause of eczema, which is this leaky skin. And that's what my research is allowing us to do. So this is how we used to treat eczema. This was a textbook published in Edinburgh in 1939, and that was literally how children were treated if they had eczema. So I hope none of you guys were treated like this. We've moved on a long way. But in those days, we didn't have any good treatment for the inflammation or the itch. So the children were literally tied to the bed like that so they didn't scratch themselves. And it looks like torture, because if you have eczema, it is torture, and that was the best treatment. So since then, loads of research has gone on. There's been a real new era in treating eczema because we've got much more targeted treatment that is much better. And these targeted treatments have been fantastic breakthroughs in assessing the inflammation and really targeting the inflammation. The drugs are better. There are, in some ways, fewer side effects from the new medications. They are, in theory, easier to use, although a lot of my patients say they're not easy to use. But as I've said, the new treatments really just target the inflammation, not the skin barrier. And the new treatments don't work for everyone. So we've still got a long way to go. And another major part of my work is working with patient support groups. So this is the Eczema Outreach Support Group, who tell me clearly we need to do better with treatment. So why do I love being a clinical academic? It's because the work that I do is kind of like a jigsaw puzzle that involves all these different things that come together to make the final part of the jigsaw, which is making better treatments. So if you want to be a doctor and a researcher, then you have to train for even longer to do that, but it's even more exciting. So thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Great. So we've got plenty of time for questions. Thanks for talks. There's quite a few on Slido. I assume people in the room are going to use Slido. Are they coming to mics? Daisy, what usually happens? Does anybody want to ask a question in the room? Because you can just come and use a microphone if you're not typing it into Slido. If not, I'll just go straight to Slido. Okay. Now, so the first, I'm just going to take it in order here. What would be the best answer to the question, why do you want to be a doctor? For interviews or other purposes? Well, my answer would be give your own answer to that, because if you say something and it's not really you, it might just come across as a bit insincere, and not right, because somebody might, have a follow-up question. I don't know, what do you guys think, Rosie?
I mean, I'm not involved in medical admissions, so I don't know the right answer for this, but I have heard, because my daughter went through the UCAS process, not for medicine, but some of her friends were doing that last year, that they were told that you shouldn't say, I want to help people, because that's considered to be very cliched and not very original and lacking in depth. But I think if you don't want to help people, why are you doing medicine? Because ultimately that is the end product of our medical endeavours. And so I think exactly like Professor Elder says, you need to be able to back it up with why particularly medicine and why particularly you. But I do think wanting to help people has to be your primary motivation. So like, I remember being in your position and being told that was a rubbish answer to give an interview, and it still annoys me because I think it is an absolutely valid answer. And somebody could think the corollary of that is, I don't want to help people, which seems like a mad reason to become a doctor. So, yeah.
Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. Wanting to help people is an absolutely fine thing to do. So I have been involved in sort of entry interviews for medical school when I was working in Dundee. And yeah, people said that, but like Professor Elder said, there isn't a single right answer, except that it is super important to say what is really important to you. Because if you put yourselves in their shoes, why are they asking you that question? They want to check that you have actually thought through why you want to be a doctor. Because it might sound crazy, but some people haven't really thought about that. And if the answer is deep down in your heart, actually, I want to be a doctor because my teacher said I should, because my parents want me to do it, or because I think it might be cool, none of those questions are going to sustain you through medical school. They're not going to sustain you in your many hours as a junior doctor. So the interviewer is asking that question because they want to know that you've thought about it. And they want to know your thoughts. They don't want to hear some pat answer that you've rehearsed. They want to think carefully what you're going to say, but then say what is really true for you, because that ultimately is the important thing. There isn't a single answer.
Yeah, so there will be something there. And we were all trying to reveal the some things that were there for us. I spoke about, being able to speak to people. I remember my dad saying to me once when I was quite small, he'd watch me speaking to my granny. And he said, gosh, you were actually really good at that. And I never thought anything of it at all. But he'd seen other kids, I guess, speaking to older people. So there will be something there for you. And best to try and say that. So we'll move on. Do a lot of doctors work part-time?
Yes. I don't know what the statistics are, but loads do. Loads do. And you don't have to have children in order to work part-time. Anybody can request to work part-time. It's not always straightforward. You have to negotiate with whatever stage you're at, but it's totally doable for many, many different reasons. Caring roles, your own personal health, just wanting to get a work-life balance. All of these are valuable reasons.
Rosie?
And in intensive care medicine, we very frequently have doctors who are training to do emergency medicine, anaesthetics and other acute specialties. And I've noticed in the last 3 or 4 years, the number of people working part-time, not because they are part-time academics or because they have caring responsibilities, has increased hugely. And the three of us can retire at 60 if we want. But people going into medicine now, who knows when they'll be able to retire, and you need to pace yourself. So again, I think any kind of stigma against working less than full-time, equating working less than full-time with having a lesser commitment to your career is fading. And I very much think Sort of your generation going into medicine will demand a better work-life balance and won't be wanting to work every hour God's end. So I can see working less than full-time becoming more and more normalised and in no way sort of indexed to level of commitment to medicine.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. So you can definitely these days work once you're employed by the NHS less than full-time. There's a whole lot of arrangements to allow that. You can also train, yeah? So loads of trainees going through all these different specialties are less, what we call LTFT, less than full-time. And there's a range of reasons for it, as you've heard here. So females and males both do it. The only thing I would add is the place it's most difficult to do it less than full-time is at university. A few courses, have ways to allow that, but most of the courses actually expect you to flow through in the, typically 5 or 6 years to go through. But once you're, as I say, what we call a postgraduate, after you're graduated, it's easy and getting easier. What have we got? This is a difficult one. What was the biggest false start or problem you've had getting to where you are in your career?
I don't know if I've had any. Does that make me sound really lacking in insight?
Well, that's what I say, it's difficult. Anything spring to mind for you there?
Yeah, I really struggled at the time when I was, as a junior doctor, you have to, you work long hours as a junior doctor and you're also doing exams. So, you all know what it's like doing exams, but imagine doing a super challenging, really full-time job as well. And it nearly tipped me over the edge. I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I really was close to quitting medicine because I was just tired all the time and really grumpy. And you think, well, why am I doing this? But thankfully, I pushed on and got the exams, and then it's behind me. So I think, yeah, I nearly quit, and I'm glad that I didn't. And so I suppose, you need to be prepared that it's not easy, and then, the people around you might support you. But for me, the biggest thing was somebody said to me, do you know, you don't have to carry on, you can quit. And that's what allowed me to carry on and not quit. Because there's also a big thing, like once you've got to medical school, people saying, oh, it's amazing to get into medical school, you can't possibly give up. But you can. Like, you still remain an autonomous human being. You can do anything you want to. So, I don't know, it depends what you're motivated by. I was that naughty child that if somebody said you don't have to do it, then suddenly I wanted to do it. So, yeah, it has its ups and downs, but have strategies for keeping going if that's really what you want to do.
If I could come back to that, I would say that the value of having mentors or people who can act as sort of critical friends, who can sort of say to you, yes, things are going, not your way right now, and you are really tired, and you are studying for whatever exam, but actually this is your long-term plan, this is what you're doing well. It's really helpful to have that, and that could be a peer, or that could be somebody more senior, and that could be all the way from now to medical school and beyond, because I think sometimes when you're in the thick of it, keeping that perspective is really hard. When your children aren't sleeping and you've still got to do your exams and emails are piling up, it feels like a lot. So having somebody who can help you keep your eyes on the prize is incredibly helpful. Because it doesn't take much. I think I've been really fortunate that I've managed to get through relatively unscathed, but it doesn't take much to tip people into a stage where they need to take time out or they need extra help. And there's a lot of help available to people to get them through difficult times, but just giving yourself the permission to access those, I think, is really important. And having a mentor or a friend who plays that role in your life, I think, can be very helpful.
Yeah, so exams are still a big part of university life, not just medical school life. And in general, you're facing exams at school that are selecting whether or not you're able to get into medical school. And some people are just good at passing exams and other people find it tougher. The way people are assessed in medical school now and after you qualify, you still have exams, and Rosie very nicely listed all the ones that she had done. But exams aren't quite as important these days as they used to be. You're assessed more in the workplace on an ongoing basis, which I think overall makes it a bit less stressful, I think. What made you choose the medical school you attended? Well, we're all a bit biased, I think, or the same.
Maybe I can go. I told you we moved to Yorkshire when I was a young child, and I wanted to get as far away as I possibly could. And I'd never been to, I mean, I do love Yorkshire, don't get me wrong, but I needed to get away from my parents. So it was either London or Edinburgh in my not very educated mind. And Edinburgh gave me a place, so. But also it's a very good medical school.
And my mum said to me I wasn't allowed to stay at home because she said if I stayed at home I'd just be a little mouse and I'd never go out and I'd never make friends, and she wasn't wrong. So right away that kind of restricted my my options to. I was like, I'm not going to go anywhere outside of Scotland, so sort of the 4 other medical schools. And I don't know how many of you have been up to the Teviot Place Medical School or visited the Anatomical Museum, but I remember on an offer holders open day going up to the entrance of the Anatomy Museum and seeing the elephant skeleton and just thinking it was the coolest thing ever. And, you know, from somebody who read too many Penguin classics as a young girl, I just thought, I'm coming here. And I'm really pleased I did. I thought I got a really good medical education, and I'm still here 30 years later, so yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I said at the beginning I was the first person in my family to go to university, never mind to medical school, and I'm from a family who've been based in Edinburgh many years back, and so I just remember thinking, you know, or being, you know, hearing that Edinburgh was, you know, the place I should try and go if I could get the grades to get in, and I did. Another thing I think Rosie's hinted at there is the reputation of Edinburgh Medical School around the world was and remains absolutely fantastic. Yeah, so if people hear that you graduated in Edinburgh, it's a wee mark of distinction for you. But as I say, I'm kind of biased about that bit of it too. Can you change specialty? Who would like to talk about that, Rosie?
So you can. I know of one person in the year above me at medical school who went almost to the end of paediatric training and then decided to train in pathology. I'm not entirely sure why, but it's a big change, as you can imagine, paediatrics to pathology. And it did mean having to reapply for training and start right at the beginning again. So it is possible, but it obviously does mean you will often need to go right back to the beginning of training, which involves both time and all that kind of emotional energy that you need to expend to go through training. But especially in your first, you graduate and then you do 2 years as an FY1 and then an FY2, and then it is not at all unusual nowadays for people to spend 3, 4, maybe even 5 or 6 years trying lots of different specialties and just gaining experience before finally deciding on what they want to do and then applying for a training program. I went into a training program as soon as I finished my house jobs, but it's becoming increasingly common for people to take their time, sometimes spending some time working abroad, particularly Australia, New Zealand, spending some time travelling, and so there really is no hurry to really find what suits you before you commit to training. And even once you do start training, one of my colleagues who's just moved to Glasgow had gone up to sort of the second year of anaesthetic training, having spent 6 years after house jobs doing various things, and he's now decided to train in orthopaedic surgery. So he's quit after 2 years of anaesthesia and is now going to do orthopaedics. Again, starting from the beginning, but it's what he wants to do. So if there is opportunity, it does mean that you do need to spend a bit more time, but when you think about training and then the duration of your consultant life, the consultant life is by far the longest period of time you'll spend in your career as a doctor, so it's worth taking time to land in the specialty that works for you, because if you really love what you do, it gets you through the bits of the job that can be harder. So it's absolutely worth changing if you decide there is something that would suit you better.
Sarah, anything you want to add?
Yeah, not much to add, but I suppose don't worry about what specialty you're going to do at the moment.
Yeah.
Just like one of the reasons that I chose medicine is because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was at your stage. I just thought I wanted to do something useful, something helpful, something that would answer questions. And you train through medical school, and then you can choose at that stage or later. There's absolutely no rush, and it's a wealth of opportunities. We're all saying our specialties are the best. If you speak to many different doctors, they tell you their specialty is the best. So don't worry about choosing now. Just keep your options open and enjoy the breadth that's available.
Yeah, agreed. And I think I said, there'll be some things you see at medical school, you think, oh, I just couldn't do that. I couldn't imagine myself doing that. And other things you think you can do. So you've got to think, well, what would send me home happy at the end of a day? What will make me feel good? It might be research, it might be caring for very sick people, it might be caring for old people, but you'll find things in your own head that motivate you. Did you ever feel burnt out during your years in medical school? If so, how did you recover from it?
I didn't feel burnt out at medical school. A bit like Rosie said, I really enjoy being a medical student. It's brilliant. You learn loads of great stuff. You have loads of, quite active social life, and it's a period when you really, you can really find out so much about yourself, because it's if you're at all interested in other human beings, if you're at all nosy like me, then you get to ask people everything about themselves, and it's really brilliant. So I can honestly say I really love medical school. The time I nearly burnt out was when I was a junior doctor doing exams at the same time, but yeah, not at medical school.
Same for me, but what I would say is I think for medical students nowadays, the pressures are very different in the sense that it does feel like there is more pressure, peer pressure to join a specialty society, like to be a first year and join the Cardiothoracic Surgical Society or the Obs and Gynae Society. There seems to be a big pressure on getting publications. There's also the kind of pressure of, because you're so much more connected in terms of social media, people sort of saying, oh, I stayed up to 3 a.m. and then I still went to my exam and got a distinction. And I think that was a lot easier to ignore or dial down when we were at university. So I think it's a really good thing to think about when you start medical school. How am I going to pace myself? And what does good enough look like to me? And not what good enough looks like to people on Instagram, or what good enough looks like to people who, quite rightly and good for them, have absolutely set their heart on publishing lots in medical school, because there will be somebody in every year who will have multiple publications by the time they graduate. That is not the expectation. And I think if you end up sort of pinning your hopes to being a person that just isn't you, that's going to potentially lead you towards the path of burnout. So, what does good enough look to you, and sticking to that rather than necessarily being influenced by others.
Yeah, thanks. So there's two sort of very factual ones I'll just deal with quickly. Somebody's got, after 6 years of medicine, what next? So most medical degrees are 6 years, some are 5 years. There's a few new ones coming that may even be 4 years. But it's when you graduate, everybody in the UK must do what's called the foundation programme. So that's 2 years. And in that, you rotate around a whole lot of different specialties. Right, so again, giving you an idea of what it's like to work in a surgical ward or general practice or in another medical specialty. So that everybody must do that, and then after that, you choose which specialty you'd like to train in. Although many people, as we've heard, do a couple of extra jobs to help them make their mind up. And then there's another question here about how can it be, how is it that there are not enough doctors, but also not enough university places? Well, what a fantastic question. That's because what we call workforce planning for the National Health Service in the UK has not been very good, right? Nobody has really sat down and worked out, right, we're going to need 50,000 doctors in 10 years' time. How many medical students do we need to train? So we're in a situation at the moment where there aren't actually enough doctors, and we're reliant on doctors coming from India and many other countries around the world. Okay, and we're trying to increase the number of medical school places, and that's actively happening. Now here's one for Sarah. I want to do an EPQ, I'm not even sure what an EPQ is, on whether either psoriasis or atopic eczema is influenced more by genetics or environmental factors. Would you say this is a good topic to research?
Oh, well, totally biased, but yeah, that is part of my research, to understand the difference between gene and environment, or how they interact with each other. So I don't know what EP2 is either, but definitely a very good topic. I'd even go so far as to say if you want to email me, then we can chat about it. My email's very easily found, just Sarah Brown, University of Edinburgh. You'll find me.
After graduating, I'd like to work and travel. Is there any country that I wouldn't be able to work in? Well, UK medical degrees, every university in the UK that you might graduate from is what's called internationally accredited. There will be variations from country to country about immigration rules, but in general, the answer would be yes. With a UK medical degree, you would get into work wherever you want. I don't know if you guys have got anything to add about that, Sarah?
The more specialist you get, the more you might have to do local specialist exams to work in certain countries. But yeah, as a junior doctor, it's relatively flexible.
Okay, and we'll take this one. How do you balance kids and work in terms of being able to provide for family?
Like, when my daughter was 4, she had a play date and she was like, let's play mummies and daddies. And she brought out her little beanbag and a blanket and just lay down and said, I'm on night shift, you've got to be really quiet. And I was like, is that your idea of what a mother is? But it's not easy. It's great if you have family nearby to help out, if you have good childcare. And again, like I was saying with medical school, it's sort of deciding what good enough looks to you, like as a parent. At my daughter's school, there were some mums who were doing it full time and they were going to be doing more stuff than I was because I was working, and to not feel intimidated by that or feeling that I was necessarily a bad parent. I think work expands to fill the space available, and when I was very early in my career and I didn't have my daughter, I felt that every hour of the day was accounted for, and then you have a really young child and you feel it's really difficult, and then they're an adolescent and you still feel it's busy. So it is busy, but with the right support network around you and good childcare and expectation management, it's very much doable. But then I only have one, so.
Well, I only have 2, but I have a very big dog and 2 cats as well who are also challenging. But anyway, joking aside, to me it was an incredible privilege to become a parent. Like, you can't assume you're going to have kids. So yeah, it was amazing, and it also made me a better doctor. So I told you I got interested in atopic dermatitis and eczema because it affects children. But what I didn't tell you is when I was at medical school, I was terrified of paediatrics. Like, I was one of those people, if I touched a baby, it would immediately start crying. I just didn't know what to do. I was the youngest of 3 kids. I just never had that experience of looking after children. So then when I had my own baby, it was totally life-changing. I held a baby and it stopped crying because that was my job. I mean, it still cried, don't get me wrong. My kids cried a lot, but they were my babies, and that was really life-changing. And it also gave me a real understanding of what it's like for parents to care for children. So some of the things that I'd recommended in terms of complex lotions and potions to use for skin conditions in children, I realised there's no way I could do that myself for my own kids. So in many, many ways, I've become a better doctor through my children, and my kids are now grown up. They're like 21 and 23, and I can say this because they're not here, but they would say if they were here that it hasn't been terrible having a mother that's a doctor. They've kind of learned and benefited from it in a way as well. And whatever your parents do, you try to do your best as a parent. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, and I don't think being a doctor and a parent is different at all. You just learn to juggle and try and do what's best.
Yeah, well, I only have 2 kids. My wife wasn't a doctor, and looking back, I wish I'd spent more time with my kids. They don't say that, interestingly, to me. They don't feel I was kind of absent working the hours that we used to work. But I feel that a wee bit, and it's made me think a lot more now about the whole work-life balance thing that everybody's talking about a lot more. When you have kids, these are brief and precious times in your life. So when that comes for you, make sure you adjust your career accordingly, would be my advice to you. I guess the online bit will finish prompt, yeah? Yeah, so we've got, let's see if, just let me, I can scan one last question because we're not going to be able to, let's just say that one. quite a lot of them are about specialty to choose. In fact, most of them are. Do all this different, last question, do all the different specialties take the same time to train, and do they all have the same number of exams? Not exactly the same amount of time, broadly the same, not exactly the same number of exams. If you want to be a general practitioner, after you graduate, you've got 2 years of foundation and 3 years of training to be a GP. Okay, if you want to be a hospital consultant, on average, it would be 2 years of foundation and about 7 or 8 years. So it's longer to be a hospital consultant. But any thoughts down here in addition to that?
No, I mean, it takes as long as it needs to, and people who are clinical academics doing PhDs will, add time on for that. And I have some colleagues who are 50% clinical and 50% academic as trainees, and they won't finish training until they're in their 40s. But then after that, they will go on to have, probably quite stellar academic careers. So it's taking longer, but the rewards will justify that, I suspect.
You get paid while you're training as well, so it's not as bad as it sounds.
Yeah, and there's a good idea in medicine called, in many professions, called lifelong learning. So the idea that you ever stop learning or training just doesn't happen. All of us go to courses and read to try and keep our learning up to date. So that's just after 6. I hope our talks and your questions and our answers have been of some help to you. I don't know the date of the third and final session that's coming up, but that's on ethical problems, and I encourage you to come along to that one and learn some of the difficult things doctors have to think about. So I just close by thanking you for your attendance here, thanking Daisy and Rachel in our Heritage Department for putting it all together, thanking our AV and IT team for doing all the tech, and saying to you all, good luck. I hope lots of you do become doctors, and I hope you enjoy it when you do. Thank you.